Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. The Lonely Cosplayer, written by Lane Meller. Carlos was fidgety as he perched on the edge of a rough coverlet of his small bed, tracing one edge of the 80s-tastic geometric designs that it featured. His new boots were digging into his lower claws, and the fabric he'd picked was itchy wherever his sweat touched it. So basically, all of the places he wanted to itch in public, at least. Fecking cosplay. Why did he do this to himself again? He finger-combed his hair back, grateful that his new cut would mitigate most of the helmet hair he used would otherwise suffer. Plus, it matched the character. The things he did to look authentic, but still, he did look good. He gathered up his bag, then snagged his convention pass, making it sure that it was clipped neatly to the pauldron on his shoulder. Last time he had been hassled by security for trying to sneak in, as if he'd spent all this money and effort on a costume only to not drop a bit more for tickets. As if a grown man dressed as a stormtrooper wasn't the main demographic of that particular convention. He grumbled a bit, adjusted his vambraces for the 17th time as they slipped again, and made his way out of the hotel room. He was with his people again. It was amazing to be home. He spent many hours taking photos with others, hit up a couple panels, and spent far too much money in the artist's gallery. It was pure paradise, worth the itching and the occasional accidental bump into another. Seriously, with this visibility you could see why they were all such terrible shots. But the happiness of others delighting over his outfit, one he'd spent far too many hours crafting, was immense in its effect on him in return. He could take pride in this and actually have someone understand. The ebb and flow of what felt like thousands of people carried him away. He meandered through the rest of the con, weaving his way through the streams of geeks there to celebrate their love for comics and pop culture in general. Far too soon, all the booths were closing up. Glossy illustrations and plushies alike were being shoved in boxes till the next morning, and several groups looking to hang out after the party had started to gather, some to go out and some to stay in one of the many rooms that had been rented. Carlos carefully deposited his helmet and vambraces, which were easy to lose while drunk, and the loot that he'd acquired into his bed, and then went looking for his own fun. An unknown amount of time later, he came to on a rough surface. Cement, maybe? It was hard to tell in his current condition. His eyes were crusted shut, and his mouth tasted like roadkill had curled up inside before expiring. He held a gag and rolled over, which started a pounding of drums to the inside of his skull. Tump-to-tump-to-tump. Each beat of his heart sent another throb into his temple. How much had he imbibed last night? Because normally it didn't feel like elephants were dancing on his spine after a night out. Just dehydrated and a bit queasy. But this was a new level. He gagged again and then carefully wiped his face, staying on the side to try and stop jackhammer in his skull. But even just his arms moving was enough and Carlos couldn't help but puke. Well, at least he rolled over first. He thought helplessly as foul liquid spewed next to him. That, at least, seemed to settle his nausea, though it did nothing for the headache. And the smell next to him would probably turn his stomach again soon if he didn't move away. With what felt like a Herculean effort, he rolled to his other side and a few inches away from the gross pool that he created. He used the edge of one sleeve to carefully wipe his lips, and then the hand of the other to clear out his eyes a bit. Where was he? The world around him slowly became more visible, although it was dark enough that he couldn't discern that much. Probably a blessing considering how his poor brain already felt. But it did make him a bit more difficult to tell if he actually knew where he was. Perhaps somewhere in the convention center or one of the hotels. His eyes slowly adjusted to the dusk levels of lighting. The ground was too rough and too sparse to be one of the rooms. He also would have expected someone would have moved him to a bed at least if he'd passed out there. Finally, his mind seemed to stop throbbing as badly, and he was able to sit up with only a grimace. He'd sell his soul for a bottle of water in that moment, but he'd probably have to at least walk back to his own room before he could get that awful taste out of his mouth. There was another cosplayer sprawled nearby, he noted somewhat absently. Armor made from boxes, it looked like, cleverly painted and distressed, too. He would have to extend his compliments. That was always the hardest part to him, making a new thing look old. Must have been a hell of a party. He scooched himself to the wall, wincing as he heard his plastic shawls scraping along the floor. He really didn't want to repaint those. After more than a few moments resting against the wall, he managed to stumble upwards, onto unsteady toes. First order of business was to check on the other guy. He had not moved at all, but it was also hard to tell anything at all outside of the crates that were strapped to his body. He grabbed one's shoulder and shook it gently. "Please, don't be dead. Don't be dead. Don't be dead." He chanted to himself urgently as he kept slowly trying to wake the other man. A pained groan was met with a near shout of relief from the stormtrooper, although it was cut forth from Carlos was reminded how much his head still ached. "Hey, buddy, can you hear me? Are you hurt anywhere? Or just really hungover? Should I take off your helmet?" He blabbered out questions one after the other. No one wants to puke in their bucket.
"Jaxa frabeglia, sporn qual do veld."
A strange gibberish emerged from the general direction of the helmet that he was examining. "Dude, I don't know what your fandom is, let alone whatever language that comes with it. You can be out of character," he says in irritation. He did not need this right now, and he reached for the helmet. He was met with a weak attempt to block him, but he batted arms away easily, definitely hungover then. He caught the latches, and the other cosplayer went practically feral, now screaming in the same gibberish as before. Carlos let him drop. Wrestling this weirdo was obviously a waste of his time. He ran one hand through his freshly shorn fuzz on his fur, and he scowled down. "Fine! Keep your stupid helmet on. I'm getting out of here then," he snarled back, turning around quickly, almost losing his balance in the process. His stomach dropped in protest, but he pushed forward gamely. The long haul was completely unfamiliar to his eyes. Well, crap. He tested his phone. No service. He needed to get outside before his GPS kicked in. Soon, he found a large door on the far side, which he pried open. It was heavy, but manageable. The man in the armor was staring at him as he did so. Disconcerting, but still also manageable. Carlos finally cracked it enough to slip through, and watched with alarm as the armor guy started shambling in his direction. Great! Just what he needed right now, a tag-along of dubious quality. He pressed forward quickly, pulling his cell from the hidden pocket of his hip once more. No bars, of course. He scowled, which made his headache flare up again from his tightened skin around his forehead. He was getting too old for the drunken binges. Possibly. Maybe? He just would not be telling his spouse about this when he made it home tomorrow. Ugh. He was already going to catch crap for the scrapes to his lower armor. Dell was not above petty mocking when he'd done something stupid.
"Qualza zoom qual quack."
The boxy man behind him was speaking in gibberish again.
"Some small wheel sitly."
"Stop following me. I already have a hangover. I don't need this. What I need is an entire jug of orange juice and possibly an entire bottle of ibuprofen and some eggs or something." He snarked back, trying to urge his legs to move faster so he could ditch the other cosplayer. "And maybe a new brain, too." He was just rounding the first corner and past another oddly squat door when he paused. Confusion. Something was not correct, because it did not compute. That was a window, which should show him the outside. That was not what outside looked like for a normal hotel, or anywhere on Earth, really. He scurried to the long stretch of transparent wall, one hand pressed against the cold surface. Unlike glass or plastic, it seemed to hold the chill like a rock crystal did. Outside floated an orb, a massive, swirling, glowing planet. Specks of green overwhelmed by blue and turquoise, and splashes of white and grey that reminded him vividly of pictures of clouds from space. But the continents were all wrong, not to mention the black ring that also seemed to loop the whole thing like some sort of cosmic necklace. He didn't know how long he stayed frozen, both in mind and body. As he watched the spaceships, his mind screeched dock in and away from the rotating platform that consumed part of the globe. Something brushed his shoulder. Then one long rectangular finger poked him in the ribs. He spun around, face pale, as he glared again at the... Well, was he actually a cosplayer? Because this was space. Oh my God, are you an alien or waiter? Am I the alien? Carlos pondered for a moment before the creature jabbed him again.
"Qual zoom latba."
The thing yelled again. "I don't understand you." he screeched back, and then muttered, "Why am I fecking bothering? Can't understand me anyway." He stopped the third jab and the tender part of his upper rib cage in between the plates of his plastic breastplate. He wouldn't generally consider himself a violent man, but he would not stand for such blatant disrespect for his person. He grabbed one boxy arm and pushed. The thing crumpled like a house of cards. Well, that was not exactly the fight that he'd been expecting. "Oh God, oh shit," he breathed out, as the universe seemed to pause around him in his panic. Carlos rushed forward, putting the same squarish arm towards him, only for it to pop off. He'd killed him and dismembered him. But underneath was more armor. This was a turquoise blue, with bits of shiny chrome infused like pinstriping along the sides. Calloused hands traced the line of the metal arm. This was super cool looking. Why was Box Guy hiding this? He reached for the latch on the side of his helmet. It revealed another helmet. What sort of crazy Scooby-Doo level shenanigans was this? He felt around for another latch, but couldn't find one and gave up, leaving the cosplayer, alien, robot, thing on the ground. He decided to keep going, leaving the strange metal being behind him. Carlos felt guilty, but what else was he supposed to do? Carry around a guy with 2 sets of armor who couldn't speak English, who was actively poking you? Not happening. He kept walking, trying to keep his footsteps quiet, but the plastic bits of his fake shoe caps, as well as the bits of plastic scraping against each other, did not lend itself to stealth. It physically hurt to do, but he started to shed bits of homemade costume, stashing them against one of the many long windows. He kept his front and back chest pieces secured, down to just the flight suit, his shoes and 2 largest pieces of plastic armor. It did make a lot less noise, which eased the lump in his throat a bit at how much time and effort he'd just abandoned on the floor. But it wouldn't help him any if he was dead. Carlos came to another doorway, inset into the side of the sloping hallway he'd been making his way down for many long minutes. He couldn't even see the box guy anymore. He had to pry this one open as well. The metal shrill with its protest against such abuse as it let an unholy noise. All of the doors in whatever ship he was in were broken or something. He held his breath, waiting for someone to come investigate, but he heard nothing, so he slipped through. Inside reminded him vaguely of a server room that he'd seen while working IT in years past, although much more futuristic looking. More of the clear non-plastic showed twists and rubber and metal underneath his feet. He poked one of the screens. They came to life, spitting what looked like some kind of sort of code to him as he scrolled through. He kept poking, hoping that he wasn't dumping the fuel system or something. A few more minutes of investigation yielded nothing further. The language barrier was just too big, and the program too foreign to even try and fake his way through. He moved on, pushing into yet another door past the rows of wires, and away from the bank of windows before, hopefully towards the belly of the ship. He had a lot of questions, and still no plausible way to get answers. This time the door parted easily, and he pushed into yet another hall. This one was lined with even more doors, each one on separate color. Well, fortune favors the bold. Carlos opened the first. This one was also a sticky door, and he had to peel it aside. He had to poke his head in. There was another box, guys. He backpedaled and went to the second door, and the third. By the 10th door, he had a small crowd of poorly dressed following after him. After 20 doors, he was sweating but determined, and the next new box guys weren't poking him in the ribs, although they did keep talking to him in their alien language, as if he could magically learn it. Carlos had finally run out of doors and patience. The box aliens did not seem to be fans of personal space at all, pressed up against him and then each other, with a strange, discordant language buzzing between them. They were still acting like ducklings when he made his way back to the hallways with windows, so he turned back and led them to the original boxman that he'd accidentally de-armed. Once they were clustered around the fallen companion, distracted, Carlos took off again. He passed a pile of white and orange armor he'd shed again, and then back to the room full of computers. He scurried past when he noticed several of the box aliens poking around. He was sick of them following him everywhere, so best to keep going. He came to another door, and this one opened with his whisper of a touch. He took a few paces into the new room. High ceilings spread out across what looked like a living room. Oh, feck, more aliens, and they seemed even less friendly than the armored guys from earlier. An ear-splitting noise speared through his brain. The hairs on the back of his arms stood on end as the eerie screech of an alarm echoed through the halls and inside his skull. Then, almost as one, the trio of new aliens leveled gun-shaped objects in Carlos's direction. They were remarkably human-looking, although the towering height and the 3 digits in each hand still made it immediately obvious that they were not. He dove forward and rolled, skidding against the burgundy carpet, narrowly missing a strange energy burst that came from the muzzles of the weapons. Purple slashes filled the edge of his vision as they fired again. He rolled again. The burns later were going to be epic. They fired a third time, no longer quite as in sync, but it didn't matter. He had been cornered. Each one splashes against his chest, scorching the plastic, throwing Carlos back in the long hall of the windows. He groaned, pushing himself up and threw himself back into the room and at one to one of the taller aliens. Something dripped into one eye as he swiped it away, eyes full of steel. Something or someone had brought him here, and he was betting these jerks with guns would know more, or he could at least get a weapon of his own. He landed on the first one, wrenching one wrist back with a snap, snatching the sleek grey laser gun into his other hand. Just like laser tag, right? He turned narrowly, missing another flash of energy pulse from another tall alien, and shot the third point blank. He dropped like a puppet whose strings had been slashed, and Carlos rolled again. This time, into the remaining enemy still standing. He went comically far, like a rag doll instead of a giant being as he flopped about the room, then went still as well. Carlos sprawled out flat on his belly, let forth an aggravated sigh. The beeping cut off with a sharp whine. He was still alive, somehow. "Well, slap me on the ass and call me Skywalker," he snorted grumpily. "When I wished out to be a Jedi growing up, this is definitely what I meant."
What is a Skywalker?
A voice asked from behind the door that he was still laying near, quietly, some proper English. It was one of the box aliens, now sans most of the boxes. Elegant lines flowed into each other along the streamlined reptilian body. Candy apple red, long snout, and long tail made overlapping plates. Behind her in a rainbow of colors stood at least 10 more of the creatures. Other than hue, the some slight variations, they all seemed remarkably similar. Well, guess they really were crappy cosplayers. It's a famous line of the Jedi. They roam the galaxy and help those in need, he replied automatically, as if he didn't have bigger problems to ask about. They have laser swords and perform daring feats in battle. He pressed one palm to his wet forehead.
Then it is a great honor to meet a Jedi of the sky, they said. I am Shah 95, he, her, leader of the Gorlians. You have freed us. How can we ever repay you?
Well, first off, explain where I am and how you're suddenly speaking English. What would have been a lot more helpful an hour or so ago, he retorted, although it was half-hearted at best. And where Earth is, because I only paid for 4 days of parking and I'm not paying extra fees just because an alien has a stormtrooper fetish. Everything on his body ached, even as he quipped. What he really needed was a gallon of water to chug, and a shower and a nap.
I shall answer all of that I can. Won't you explain what exactly a stormtrooper is?
Carlos closed his eyes and leaned back and went on to explain his favorite film franchise of all time. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Lord Azrakal, Dragzoon WRE, Holly Sister, Ambrose Cattell, and Quantum Wednesday. Thank you very much.